Good afternoon. We will be starting in 1 minute. Well, good afternoon, Connex community. I am Phillip Spearo. I'm today's moderator of Harnessing Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility for Stronger Business Performance. I'm joined here by an incredible panel. We'll be making introductions shortly. Down on the bottom of the screen, as many of you know, we have a Q&A section. We anticipate not being able to get to questions today, but please do leave your questions and we will carry those over to the greater Connex community and answer those offline if we don't have time to get to those today. With that being said, I am Phillip Spearo. I'm the former head of human resources for a fairly large early childhood education organization operating in 30 different states. And I am also a longtime Connex member. And we're going to go around the panel and make introductions. And making her debut, I'd like to introduce Michaela.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Michaela Dolman. I lead HR for the state of Washington, so the other Washington on the far West Coast. So I'm in state government here.
Tina?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today. My name is Tina Sharby, and I'm the Chief Human Resources Officer here at Easter Seals.
And Michael, last but not least.
Thanks, Phil. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mike Smith. I lead Human Resources for Navient, which is a Fortune 500 financial services company based here in Wilmington, Delaware. Been a longtime member of Connex, so I'm happy to be here today.
Awesome. All right, Mike, we're going to start with you first. The first question is DEIA as a concept has evolved rapidly over the last 5 years or so. What does building an inclusive, diverse, and accessible organization mean for your organization? What is the standard that you're trying to set? And what are some of those practical tips that you've used and maybe some missteps over the years that we can all learn from in order to hit that standard?
Sounds great. Thanks, Phil, for the question. So let me provide some context. First, I'm happy to say that we've been on a serious DEIA journey since around 2016. A ways before the unfortunate George Floyd incident, which I think spurred a lot of companies into action. And that's really started with our board. We were, at that time, our board was majority female. And when people say it starts at the top, I can tell you for sure that is extremely true. So when our board became primarily female, the whole dynamics changed. The questions became very different. The conversation was different. And DEIA was extremely important to that population. So they challenged us to say, hey, what are you doing in this space? So we took it on to be a major priority. And in fact, even today, we still consider DEIA as a top 5 strategic priority for our company. So some tips. So when we started back in 2016, we partnered with third party and we created a roadmap, a multi-year roadmap, knowing that this is not something you can change overnight or impact culture overnight. And we also didn't want to just hop on a bandwagon and just do what other folks are doing. We wanted to make this special and customized for us. What is it that we need and what makes sense for our culture? So we took a year, we did a bunch of analysis. We looked at our demographics, we looked at where we may have issues, we looked at the community where we work and say, hey, what is the demographic look in those communities? We looked at an engagement survey. We took all those inputs and informed a journey for us, again, over that multi-year process. So for example, in year 1, we said, you know what, let's start with getting a commitment. Our board was already committed. Our CEO was committed. Let's start getting the next level down committed. So we had like all day sessions and with that team and some activities. Then we kind of went down from there. Because what we felt was getting that commitment was extremely important. And I know everyone knows how important that is. But we said that's important in order for us to continue with that roadmap. So before we start the training, and before, which is in year 2, by the way, and then before we would start, for example, our employee resource groups, we wanted all the leaders to really be sensitive and understand, be a part of the culture, have practical things they can do. So when those things occur, they were already there. So I think that has worked well for us over the years. We really do want to create that environment where all employees feel open to bring their whole selves to work. And so that we find has been meaningful, and we all know how important it is from a performance perspective. And I'm gonna make one last note, Philip, if I can. We when we started this journey, we actually changed the acronyms from DEI to ID&E. We put the I first because we felt that if you focused on inclusion, it would make everybody feel part of the process, and then with that, the diversity and the equity will come, either from an attraction perspective or from a retention perspective. We even changed our whole value system. We changed our values to be stronger together. We trust our customers and colleagues, and so on. So anyway, I'll pause there, and thank you for the question, Phil.
Michael, thank you for mentioning that. First of all, congratulations on having a majority of your board members be women. It's a rarity in today's, certainly back then and today as well. And one of the first organizations I've heard actually kind of change the letters and lead with the I as opposed to diversity. So thank you for mentioning that as well. That's a key takeaway for me here as well. Michaela, we're going to go over to you and get some of your insights.
Yeah, thank you. And just kind of amplifying that as well as words matter and the order of words matter. So oftentimes, like I was taught, sticks and stones can break your bones, but words can never hurt you. And what I'm learning a lot in this work is that words can hurt and they are meaningful, and we must choose the right words and be purposeful about that. So what I can share with, I'll share a different angle than Michael, just to bring some different perspectives to it. I started in this role a little over a year ago. I've been in state government for 16 years now, but new in this role. And throughout my interview process, I was very clear that if you want to hire me, one of the things that we're going to be talking about in HR is that if we want to do equity, diversity, and inclusion work, we need to acknowledge that HR is a system and it is contributing to the problem. We look at the kind of makeup or demographic makeup of our workforce, and we don't match the people that we serve. In government, we're not like Apple. We can't say, if you don't like our service, go use Android. We are the only place that people can go to, and our mission is to serve all people. And if you look at both our workplace as well as the people that we serve and the outcomes and the experiences that people are having, it is an undeniable truth that there are very disparate outcomes for people. And that if you intersect it with race, with gender, with LGBTQ status, like whatever it is, the more intersections you have, the less likely you are to be successful as an employee, to find housing, in your economic status. And so what we've been talking through as a government employer is to say, if we look at this data and we do the whys, if you're familiar with lean processing and you do the whys to get down to the root of the problem, you're left with kind of two options. One is that people who come from historically marginalized communities are less than, they're lazy, they're not as smart or something, and that is the reason why they're not achieving or not as successful. Or our systems are the thing that is contributing to those disparate outcomes. And what we talk through is a government of, we believe in the idea that every person is created equal. And if that is the case, then it is that second option that is causing this disparate outcomes. And so what we've been talking about, and similar to what you had mentioned, Michael, the death of George Floyd or the murder of George Floyd was very it was a big lever for us to be able to have those real conversations to say, we cannot fix this problem until we acknowledge the truth of our responsibility and how we have been contributing to this. Otherwise, we're just putting layers above the rot that is leading to this. And so we've been having to do and it's a balance, especially as a government organization, but I imagine a lot of private sector organizations are struggling with that as well, is how do you admit that you've been causing harm or that you've been causing disparate outcomes and still move forward? And what we've been trying to do is get people to be able to acknowledge that, but also commit to what are we going to be doing differently? Because I think of what we've seen in a lot of mistakes that people have made or organizations have made is going out there and saying, you know, we're an anti-racist organization. We're committing, you know, this many millions of dollars to these charities, yet nothing has changed in our organization. Nothing has changed with our outcomes. Nothing has changed with our culture. And so we've been trying to be more purposeful about slowing down and saying, no, we're going to acknowledge the harm that we've caused. We're going to listen to the people who are impacted by these problems, and we're going to try and co-create with them. And so what we've been doing, we have an Office of Equity. So our HR office partners strongly with them, recognizing that the only way that we're going to be able to have impacts to the communities, positive impacts to the communities, if our workforce is capable and competent to do that. So HR is a huge component, but it's not about just changing the workforce. It's about changing the workforce so that we can have different outcomes for the people that we serve. So our role in HR has really been about starting with our strategic plan, redoing that, refocusing on saying our number one priority is to infuse pro-equity and anti-racism work into all the work that we do. Our second priority is to recognize that the only way we're going to be able to do that is if we have a workforce that is capable and competent to do that. So we need to invest in the workforce, both in training, but we're not going to train our way out of this. So we need to hire the right people. We need to look at what qualifications we're looking for. And then after that, then we can start looking at what are the other outcomes, what are the priorities of the work that we're doing. And so it's been, if anything, I would share with folks is it's kind of one, being able to acknowledge, like say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake and here's what I'm going to do about it. And then two, slowing down, and it's that kind of African proverb of slow down to go fast. So we want to make sure that we're not trying to jump ahead and fix something without really understanding what the root of the problem is.
Some incredible takeaways here. I've written down, for example, during the interview process, many of us are maybe in a transition period, like you were last year, and you came into the interview process wanting to see change in organizations and staying true to your values. And you named it during the interview process, and I presume that the state of Washington has followed through on those promises that they made to you. And then I really appreciate your systems perspective as well, in identifying that it's the systems that are often holding us back, and that we've got to do work in our systems here moving forward. Tina, same question over to you.
Wow, that was a lot of great information from both Michael and Michaela, and I echo what you both have said. I would say that we've had a bumpy start to our work here, and that's not uncommon, and I think we should be okay with saying, you know, we didn't get it right the first time, and we're still working at it, and we're still trying to get it to feel better. One of the first things usually I say to staff when we are working with this is that it is uncomfortable at times, and you're not going to know what to say, and you're going to say something that might be not taken the right way. Acknowledge it, like you said, Michaela. Okay, I did that wrong. Let's go ahead. Let's move forward. And also not to be afraid to ask the questions. Like, what does that mean when you say in your email signature that it says she, they? What does that mean? Like, ask the question, because not everybody knows what it is, and that it's okay to ask that question. So in order to have that type of an environment, what we've been really focusing on is being transparent and honest, and really looking for the employee experience. What I would say is that about just before COVID, I lose track of those 3 years with COVID, so it just kind of like goes into a blur. But just before that, we hired our very first DEIA director, and we had lots of great ideas, and it didn't work the way that we wanted it to work, because we weren't thoughtful on the scope of that role. Really, what happened is some of our staff said, oh, this is great, it's about time. And then some staff said, what do we need that for? Now, mind you, I'm in New Hampshire, which is, I think, up the top 5 widest states in the country. So, you know, what people typically think of when you talk about DEIA is color, right? So why do we need that? So we had a lot of work to do. We engaged a professor from the University of New Hampshire to work with us on project logic modeling. And we were able to pull back layers of what specifically were the areas that we as an organization wanted to work on. And we identified 2 specific areas. One is that staff and management at all levels are not consistently inclusive of DEIA efforts. Some were really, some not so much. And using that information, right? And then the second one is that individuals from different backgrounds, specifically the individuals that we serve, were not necessarily consistently choosing us to provide those services. So, they're, like you said, Michaela, not reflective of our community either. So really looking at that information. So let's fast forward to last year. The DEI individual that we had left maybe 2 years ago, and we had hired a director of organizational policy and culture. She comes with a lot of background and information in these efforts. And so what we decided is let's pause. Let's get a baseline. Let's see how employees really feel across the organization so that we can then tailor our work moving forward based on our employees' feedback, not on what I think as a manager or supervisor, but what the actual employee believes. So we did that. We did a survey out to staff. We received, I believe it was 76% response rate, which for us is amazing. Usually we're somewhere in like the 20 or 30s, but we really, really wanted the feedback. It was anonymous and it was sent directly to the director of organizational policy and culture. So it wasn't coming from HR. It wasn't coming from the supervisor. It's about as close as I could get to being removed from the agency entirely. And we learned a lot. We have some issues that we need to really work on. But the survey gave us the basis from where to start. And where we're starting is we are developing our roadmap, like Michael, and we've hired a consultant to come in, because one of the first things that we realize that we need to do is we need to get our executive leadership team understanding what our staff have said and what needs to be done to move that needle with staff inclusivity and equity. So even though everybody on the leadership team is like, yes, yes, but really understanding it. So we hired a consultant. He has come in and he's working with us over the next 4 months, I would say, just to bring us up to speed, taking a deeper dive into the information that we received. And then from there, we're going to develop our roadmap on how we begin to change things. The only other thing that I want to say about the director of she's fantastic, of organizational policy and culture, is that she's also created it's a subgroup, and it's called the Many Voices Committee. So instead of saying the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, we're the Many Voices Committee, and they participate in a wide variety of programs for us. So we have like a Staff Appreciation Recognition Committee. Members of the Many Voices Committee also serve on that to ensure that we're more thinking about employee recognition and appreciation, that we're looking at it through many different angles. And the other thing is that same director with policy, every time we go to revise or create a new policy, she is looking at it from that DEIA lens and saying, hey, can you take a look at this? And like, maybe the wording needs to be different, or did we address the accessibility issues in here? And it's really been very helpful for our organization.
Tina, thank you for sharing that so much. Reflecting on some of the things that you said, and just reflecting on the organization that I belonged to previously, and we had a couple different consultants come through, and I think that's one misstep on our part, that we had these different voices and we were trying to find our way. And we finally decided we need to have a person lead this effort in our organization. And we made and I advocated very strongly, we made the conscious decision that this is not going to be part of HR, but we're going to partner very closely with the person heading up what we called at the time Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging. And that was an incredible partnership. One other I guess, opportunity that we should have seized in hindsight is I'm hearing your organizations, all three of you, doing a good job of getting down to the staff level and providing trainings and opportunities to learn. We did a good job of connecting with our senior leadership, the executive team, managers in the organization, but we just never got down to the staff level. I've been gone from the organization for over a year now, so hopefully that's an effort that they've been able to take on and finally complete. But that would be one missed opportunity that I would encourage other companies to think about here moving forward is, yes, you've got to maybe start with your executive team, your leadership team, but you've got to cascade that down. And you start setting the expectation. You have a lot of messaging around your diversity, equity, inclusion efforts, but the staff members aren't maybe feeling it or seeing it or participating in that, and that can create some challenges within the organization. Tina, I just want to clarify, and we'll go around the team here. Is diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility part of the HR function, or do you partner with somebody outside of it?
So we partner with the director of organizational policy and culture, but we see it from two different lenses. We have the employees, our team, and then we also provide services to individuals who have special needs throughout the organization. So we're always trying to look at it from both lenses. Even like today, we were talking about one of our policies and a survey that we're going to hopefully put out, not specifically to DEIB, but more along engagement and satisfaction. And one of the first things we said is, okay, we're going to maybe look at the organization as a whole, but then we need to then go down to the individuals that we're serving. And we need to get that layer of input as well. And then to our funders and other sources that we work with. So always pulling it back to say, how do we get more information? And then I think data is so powerful. When you have that data, then it really makes it easy to make decisions to move forward.
Thank you for that. Michaela, I know you've got a perspective on where or who should own the diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility within organizations.
Yeah, and in our state, I had mentioned earlier, we have an Office of Equity. It reports directly, it is part of the governor's office, so it reports to the highest authority in our organization. And it goes back to what I had mentioned where, it should not, in my mind, it should not be a part of HR because we're not doing equity work just for the sake of our workforce. This is not a workforce issue. We must do equity work within HR because we need a workforce that is capable and competent of being able to serve all the people in the state of Washington. And the only way we're going to do that is if we change how we do HR. But it's not for the sake of that. It's so that we can serve the people. And so that the reason why it needs to be outside of HR is because the work needs to be focused on the business and how are we changing our business outcomes and how are we looking at our financial spend and how are we looking at how we define success in our mission and vision. And that is not HR's role. HR is a huge partner in that because the only way, like our people are, AI is here and it's here to stay, but our people are still our most important resource. So the only way we'll accomplish that is with our people, but we really want to make sure, and the Office of Equity is doing an amazing job in our state in working with all of our different agencies, saying, what are your mission vision? How do we ensure that your business outcomes are aligning to, and how do we apply an equity lens to that? And then we come in as a partner to say, and how do we look at what your people look like right now, what their capabilities are, and how do we help you build that workforce plan that will ensure that you have the right people with the right skills and competencies to carry out that new kind of vision of work.
Wonderful. Michael, over to you.
Yeah. So I love the diversity of thought here. So we decided to keep ID&E within HR. So I head up both HR and IDE efforts, and we did that for a couple of reasons. One is I had a vested interest in it, and but secondly, I'm sorry. But secondly, we felt that we wanted to keep it very measured and very tied to some of the things that we were doing in HR, so we can kind of move in step. Now we make it very clear that ID&E is a company responsibility, and everyone is involved and everyone has to lead and participate. So we make that very, very clear. But I would say we do lead it. Then the other thing I did do was to set up an ID&E corporate committee. And so on that committee, we have the heads of some of the business areas. We have the head of marketing and communications. We have the person who does our ESG. So we get together on a monthly and then a big meeting quarterly to just make sure that we're leveraging each other and that we're understanding what everyone is doing in that space. We can, again, feed off of each other and move forward with some best practices.
Wonderful. Thank you. Michaela, I'm going to head over to you, and we're talking about, in our last question, where does DEIA sit in the organization? But it's, as you mentioned, it's so much more than just HR or that particular department. There's other stakeholders involved. So how do you perceive partnering with other key stakeholders in the government to make this happen?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a similar concept. It's just a different topic, but it's a challenge that, at least in my career in HR, we've always faced, where people come to, whether it's your Office of Equity or whether it's HR, and they're like, hey, solve my problem. And they want you to, like, fix my employee or fix this issue or fix this culture. And it's really about, like, no, we have to do this together. And we in HR play a unique role, but it's a team. And I grew up playing team sports, kind of soccer as a thing, so that I'm most familiar with. So I use that analogy of, like, I play a role on the field, but the only way that we're going to win the game is if we understand what each person's role is and how we work together. And so for us, like, when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, how we carry out that work, our key partners are the Office of Equity. It's always going to be our chief financial officer or whoever is in charge of the budget, because what of saying that we have is, our budget is our biggest policy in the state, how we align our resources, how we prioritize what we're going to be spending on. But it's also each of the key business leaders, because we can't carry out this work unless each of the leaders have the competencies to be able to lead their team, because this is a change too. Like, we talk a lot about change management, and this is a change in how we look at the work, how we measure success. And so it's really trying to set our leaders up to successfully lead this, and also understand that HR is, at least in our state, one of the criticisms is we're the touchy-feely ones. And oftentimes before I would say, like, okay, no, but there's a business case behind that. But during this work, I've really been trying to embrace, like, yeah, and the only way that we're going to get through this is to acknowledge that we're human beings and we have feelings, and we can't shut those off as soon as we get through the door. And we need to have hard conversations, and we need to be able to acknowledge that we have all experienced some sort of racial trauma in our lifetime, whether you're a white man or a Black woman, or like me, a mixed race, first generation American. Like, we have all experienced the impacts of racial trauma. And if we're not willing to undo those, we're going to continue perpetuating harm forward, because hurt people hurt people. And so it's, from our role in HR, the partnership has been about, how do we bring people together? How do we acknowledge that we're all human and that we're not going to do this perfectly, but that if we have that shared goal. And so it's focused on, in the state, going back to, what's our mission? Who are the people that we're trying to serve? How do we acknowledge that we are not successfully doing that right now? And let's be real about that. And then let's come together and say, so what do we need to spend our money on? How do we need to change our workforce policies? Who do we need to, what successful measurements do we need to put into place at the business level to understand that, yes, we are making progress. We may never get there 100%, but we know that we're headed in the right direction. And that collectively, it's not about HR leading this work or the Office of Equity leading this work, but it's about that shared goal and outcome that we're trying to achieve.
Michaela, thank you so much for having a trauma lens to this. Hurt people, and certainly coming from the early childhood education space, working in low-income communities, I echo that thought as well, and being very purposeful in how we think about that work here moving forward. Tina, Michael, any thoughts on key partners and alliances that you're building within the organization to support this work and move it forward?
Yeah, I would say, as Michaela said, our chief financial officer is someone that we definitely do partner with, but also the director of organizational culture and policies, so that every time a policy is looked at or created, we have that extra lens, and we partner really closely with her. And then the other person that we partner really closely with is our IT department. there is a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes when you're collecting data, and how to collect it and how to word the data that you're collecting, and really trying to make sure, like an example of that would be, we have Veterans Day coming up, and we have our Staff Appreciation and Recognition Committee meeting with our Many Voices Committee to make sure that we do some type of a recognition out to our staff. But the only data that we collect is the voluntary data right now in the system. And we ask, have you served? But in further talking with the committee, the Many Voices Committee, we have learned that that's really not the best way to ask the question. We really want to ask, have you or anybody in your immediate family served? Because really it is a whole family piece. And so if you're going to recognize an employee, you want to recognize the family member as well. So if I have a son that has served, I want to recognize that that has occurred, and to make it completely voluntary. We had some staff asking us, we should just require that. Well, no, not everybody wants to be recognized, and they don't want to have certain things. So I would say on the IT side, it's changing things as we are asking for data. And then both the Director of Organizational Policy and the IT Director were about to go through a software implementation of Workday next month. And we're bringing in our Director of Policy and Culture and sitting through some of the setup to make sure that as we set up the system in HR, that we are trying to get rid of any of those biases, unintended, but they're baked into systems, and we need to figure out how to kind of unbake them.
That's great. That's great. And the only thing I will add is that, we have a great bond with our head of marketing and communications. That individual also oversees our community involvement. So that's been extremely important to us as we sort of making sure that we're all on the same page on what we want to put out externally versus internally, and also to work with the community. The other piece I would say is on the legal side, particularly the corporate secretary. Again, we're a publicly traded company, so always keeping tabs on what's happening in the ESG space, and also what's happening with the SEC and what disclosure requirements there may be. So again, those two groups we keep in great contact with as well.
Michael, thanks for that. We're going to move on to the next question. And Michaela, I was kind of reflecting on something that you had said a few minutes ago, that, the HR department, even though you don't own the work, you're still, executing on the work, doing the work, rethinking about systems. And we have a lot of systems in HR. So I'm going to throw this out to the group, but as we're thinking about the tangible changes that you've all made, think about our benefits, compensation, leaves, hiring, performance management. What are some of the things that you guys are doing today or in the last year to really make strides to support our goals around DEIA? And then I'll just also mention, this was a big topic in Las Vegas when we all got together a few months ago, and it made its way into the Connexion CHRO magazine as well, and the energy around really focusing on performance reviews and being very specific about the behaviors that we're looking for from leaders, especially when it comes to DEIA goals. So team, who would like to start in this area? Some of the tangible tactical things that you've kind of baked into the systems.
I'll start, because you did a great segue with the performance management and ID goals. So we actually instituted that. So we have, and we started again with the top layer, and then each year we will filter it down. But we require 10% of an individual's goal to be ID related, and that we will work with you on kind of what that should look like. And we kind of bifurcated, so we can say it can be, what can I do to help instill this culture for my team, or even what is it that I can do to personally grow in this space as well. So that becomes 10%. We're now down to the manager level. We haven't required below the management level to do that yet. So that's been going well, I think, and having folks take that very seriously. In preparation for that, I would say one of the things that I'm very proud of is that we created an IDE leaders guide. So again, it's a living document where leaders where we give them information on on, why is this important to us? How does that relate to our values as a company? What are some of the terminology you may be come in contact with, or that may be helpful for you to know? How do you have an authentic conversation with people? How do you tell stories with your employees? How do you be more transparent? If we think about all of the employee life cycle, what can I do when I hire a person? What should I think about? What should I think about during performance management time? So again, those things I think have been helpful. And then we use that, we train everybody on that and say, hey, now think about that as you think about what your goal should be for the year. And so quickly, just a few other things we've done. Again, on the benefit side, I don't think this is extraordinary at all, but we've increased our parental leave for folks. What we've found is that, again, this is I think common as well. But when we looked at our data, females were exiting at a much higher rate once they reached that director level. So we said, what can we do to kind of help or encourage that population of people to stay and grow with the company and move into more executive roles? So we did multiple things. Parental leave. We have some other fertility type programs that we put in place as well. We do a lot around mental health, and again, we all know that impacts everybody in some form or fashion. We provide paid days for volunteerism. So I think everyone gets at this point 3 days to do volunteer work. We have a My Day. It's with we went back and forth on do we create a holiday for Juneteenth, and that became a very sticky topic for us. And so what we decided to do was to create a My Day, so everyone gets to choose 1 day a year that they take off, whether it's a holiday for their own personal, for their culture, or a personal thing, or whatever they want to take it for. We did some partnerships with some HBCUs to kind of help bring in employees for internships, so we can kind of tap into that pool of folks as well. And also on the hiring front, we went through all of our job descriptions and kind of looked at, do we have words in here that are biased? Do we have words that may offend people? Nowadays, with AI, you can probably do that a lot quicker than what we did. We manually went through every job description in order to kind of make that work. But I would say those are some of the things we've done from a tangible perspective.
Michael, that's great. Those are some really great tangible efforts that your organization is doing. We're still in the learning phase here, and so what I would say is, taking a look at that survey that we conducted and seeing where we can have the largest amount of impact. We are just wrapping up a pay equity with an external source to take a look to see what that data is going to show us. And then one of the KPIs that we track internally is our movement, how many staff are moving up or across the organization, what percentage of staff. And then from there, once we have that data for about 6 more months, we'll go back and see, okay, who are the people that are moving? And more importantly, who are the people that are not? And then we'll start to peel back the layers. My word of advice would be is start small, pilot things, check them out, see if they work, and don't be afraid to fail, because that's okay. We learn from that. And then, you can bring it to the next level.
Yeah, I think in the state of Washington, this is also an area where I was grateful to hear from you too, because I feel like we have, as a government organization, we have challenges in limited budget. Some of our ethics rules have been what we're trying to figure out is, how to work around those when you can't give away state time. So even the idea of, a 30-minute wellness break is technically someone not working. And so we're trying to learn how to be creative and scrappy within the confines of what it means to be a government organization, where we also have to be responsible with taxpayer dollars. And we have a lot of scrutiny from the public right now. But what we've been trying to focus on or use is the mindset of universal access. And what that means is that if you solve for everyone, if you design for everyone to have access from the beginning, then you don't need to, in the long run, like look at equity work where we have to make a special accommodation for an individual person. And the examples that we like to give is like at least that I appreciate, is like the remote control or the voice to text, where those were specifically designed for people with disabilities, but we all benefit from them. If we can design it in that way, then everyone can benefit from it. And so what we've been trying to do is bring that mindset into how we look at all of our kind of workforce benefits and work. Within our hiring process, that's been our number one priority, because we know that if our goal is to change the workforce so that we can better serve the people of Washington, you can't train your way out of it. And so we want to make sure that we're not creating barriers for the right people to be hired into the work. So when we're specifically looking at hiring, some of the changes that we've made have been looking at the degree removal has been something that's been kind of in the zeitgeist right now. What we're trying to say is it's not just about removing degrees, but it's about creating different pathways to say there are many ways to show that you are qualified to do this job. So how do we create those clear pathways in the job announcement to say, hey, a degree is one way? Because many of us were fed that myth that, if we spend $100,000 in student loan debt, then we can get that job. So we don't want to take that away from people who invested in their degree, but we also want to show that, hey, if you did this type of work, right out of high school, you can also show qualifications to do that. Or if you have this type of experience volunteering with the community, that also shows that you have the skill set to do that. So we're trying to expand ways that people can show that they're qualified and competent to do the work. We've also been looking at, and I don't think this is unique to state government, but it definitely aligns with specific jobs in state government, where we've been trying to add in lived experience qualifications as well. We're piloting that with our Office of Homeless Youth, saying that, hey, the best way that you can know if your job is to go out and to do surveys of people who are homeless, if you have experienced homelessness before, you're likely to know where people are living right now. So you're likely to better be able to go find them, and you're likely to be able to establish a relationship of trust where you can hold that interview and we can get the information that we need. And so how do we build in those qualifications that we know are tied to the business plan, that are going to help us do the work better, but are also giving opportunities and opening it up for a more diverse workforce to show that they're qualified, when many times those people have experienced barriers in the past. We're also looking at, how do we mitigate bias in the interview process and the assessment process, similar to what you were saying, Michael, around looking even at our job announcement. There's a lot of research that shows that women and people of color are only going to apply for their job if they meet 100% of the qualifications, or if you have specific wording in there, they're going to read it as gendered language, saying like, oh, that's not for me, that's for somebody else. And so we're trying to remove that language so it's more open and accepting to all populations. Again, we've been kind of scrappy, so that things that we have been trying to do, we established, this was pre-pandemic, but an infants in the workplace policy so that parents could bring their kids to the workplace. I brought my youngest in for the first 6 months. I can say everybody loves it except for the parent, because it's really stressful when you're bringing your kid to work. But it was also a way that I knew I wasn't able to take that time off because of the work that I had. So it was a great opportunity for me to still be able to bond with my child. And it really changed the workplace culture as a whole. So it was, people really liked it. I was surprised at how much people enjoyed it. And then one of the things, and there was a question in the chat that I answered as well, but it was about, how do you partner with your business resource groups, and how do you kind of balance, what their demands are versus what your policies are? One of the things that we've been co-creating with our business resource groups is changing our workplace dress code, as well as expanding the definition of leave. And those came from it came from our LGBTQ plus business resource group, but all of the business resource groups kind of bought into it, because what they realized is, dress codes inherently are telling people like, hey, there's one way that your hair can look, or there's one way that you can dress that is the right way to show professionalism. But really, what do you need to wear to be successful in this job? And how do we remove some of those biases or expectations that are saying that there's only one right way to be successful in the workplace? And then this expansion on the definition of leave has been, many of us have chosen family, and we're not able to use the leave that we want because the people who we want to care for, the people who are in our family, don't qualify. And so it's things like that. We've actually already done that. We, as a state, we offer paid family medical leave to any employer in the state, and we expanded it there. And we have great research to show that it didn't actually increase the quantity of leave requests that came in. And I share that because when we've been doing this stuff, a lot of times you'll get people who say, oh, we can't do that because, there might be leave abusers out there, or this might be a financial risk to us, because then too many people will start taking leave and we're not going to be able to, meet our workforce operational needs. And so using that data to be able to say, like, hey, I understand that your concerns, and actually here's proof that shows that those aren't true concerns, and we can still do both and meet our business goals. And then the last thing that I'd say is we are about 80% unionized in our workplace, but through our collective bargaining process during this last cycle, we were able to really kind of focus in on knowing, again, that we have a limited budget. We chose to prioritize kind of raising the wage. We did do kind of a cost of living adjustment for our whole workforce, but we also focused on targeted increases for our low wage workers, recognizing that we want everyone in our workforce to feel like they have a living wage. We focused on that. And then we also focused, instead of a lot of kind of percent increases of salary, focusing on lump sums, because we know those are more impactful to people who make less money as well.
Michaela, thank you for that. I'm going to continue the theme of universal access, and also mean scrappy, and also touching leaves. And in some ways, these are the things that employees feel. So as we embark on these journeys, or we continue these journeys, we want to look for those connections with the employees, and so they can start experiencing it themselves. And I recently consulted at an organization, a nonprofit, and we updated the bereavement leave. And I know many of us have done that during COVID, but we expanded it, and we reflected more of the community norms and practices that particular community observes, and that's gone over really well for them and is aligned with their mission as well. And then also thinking about our employees and short-term disability. At the time, our teachers were not eligible for short-term disability over the summer months, and we wanted to make sure that all of our employees had access to short-term disability at all times. And sure enough, we had a couple teachers happen to have babies over the summer, and they were able to receive some payment from short-term disability, and they were grateful for that. And what they were able to do is they were able to spend more time with their child and not feel the financial pressures of having to come back into the workplace real quick. So a couple great things there as well. We're down to our last 3 minutes, and this will be a quick question. We've talked about some really good initiatives and some strategies, and getting into the weeds of how we actually implement this. But how do we measure this? And Michael, I know you feel very strongly about this, so kick us off real quick and give us a couple of pointers on what you're doing over at Navient.
I'll try to be quick. Thanks, Phillip. So we've been at this for a while, and so at some point, we ask ourselves, so what results are we seeing? How do we know that we're doing a good job? And our board is asking the same questions, right? So just a couple of things. One is, we've redesigned our engagement survey to have a really robust ID&E index there, and so we ask specific questions there, and then we drill that data 100 million different ways to see how we can help pinpoint or target messages or communities or pockets of people that may not be at the place where we would like for them to be. So that's been extremely helpful. We do our CEO is new. He came on in May. So as part of the strategy to get him to build trust for him, we've been doing a kind of a roadshow of our executive leadership team to different sites to, again, to kind of build that relationship, and also at the same time, gather information from people on what's important to them and what they're seeing or not seeing, particularly in this whole hybrid environment. We do every year not only a pretty robust pay equity analysis, but we do a labor supply analysis, and this is one of the things we did early on, and that is really looking at how do we compare to the community in which our locations are and the people we source. So, for example, if we're hiring call center agents in upstate New York, what does diversity look like in that area? And so what should we be expecting internally, or how do we compare? So we can, again, kind of take a look at areas that we need to focus in on. They even do a similar analysis in-house every year. Again, I think everyone is doing this for the most part, but promotion rates, attrition rates, all those things. People who are in our leadership development program, are they being promoted at a higher rate? People in our employee resource groups, are they more so on succession plans than not? So again, just trying to integrate all those pieces together so we can see whether there's benefit. I do want to say real quick, I think Tina mentioned this, and that is everybody is on a spectrum or journey in this ID&E world or space. And so, keeping in HR, for example, was a way to make it less intimidating and really kind of help bring everyone along. So again, we just have to be very careful, I think, everyone, on not going too hard or too soft on this journey.
Michael, thank you. Oh, go ahead, Tina.
I just wanted to add one thing, and I probably should have said this right at the very beginning. I think for us anyway, one of the first things that we've been working on as an executive leadership team is defining what diversity means to us. Because really, if you're going to measure, you need to know what you're measuring. And that's been an interesting conversation because we are trying to look not just at the staff, but the individuals that we serve and figuring out exactly what that means for us as an organization. If you have such a broad definition, it's really harder to be able to get some of those measurable goals in there. Just an FYI.
And Michaela, I'm sure we could probably have a longer discussion about this, but a couple insights as far as how you measure the progress over at the state of Washington?
I think very, very similarly to what Michael and Tina shared. I think just for time's sake, the additional thing that I would add is for those listening, just kind of recognizing that a lot of it's a change for people again. So we look at the change curve a lot, and that recognition that, like, if you're here, you're going to dip for a while before you go back up. And, so as you're measuring your engagement scores or even your customer satisfaction scores, when you're making changes that are meaningful, it's going to have a dip. So don't be afraid. Like for us, like what we just shared, we're about to launch October is when we do our annual employee engagement survey, and we're going through an organizational change in my team right now. And we were talking about this yesterday around, I don't know, like we might not have good scores. And I was like, I hope we don't, because if our scores are the same as they were last year, then people aren't being truthful, because change is hard and it's scary. And, and we're not going to, in order to do this differently, we're going to have to reduce our quality because we're not going to be good at this new thing. It takes time before we get good at it again. And all of those things mean that people are going to be dissatisfied for a period of time. So, if you're embarking on that and you're looking at measurements, just recognize that sometimes a dip is okay. And that means people are being honest.
That is such a key takeaway. I experienced that in our last organization as well. We attributed to awareness as people are becoming more aware and start working on the work in themselves as well. That creates some friction, right? And you're going to see a little bit of a dip. That's the hard work that we're all putting into it, and it's for sure worth it in the long run. So this has been an incredible panel. We're going to continue the conversation on the Connex community. I know many questions rolled in. Sure, we'll have an opportunity to answer those questions on the Connex community and answer anything else that comes up there as well. I want to remind everybody that Connex is having another Connection event on November 8th and 9th, and it'll be great to see everybody virtually for that event as well. So signing off, have a great day, everybody.